Hello, and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin the presentation shortly. We're just going to give everyone a minute to log in. Thanks. Hello again, and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin the presentation in just about 1 minute. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log into the room. Thanks. All right. Again, if you've just logged in, thank you for joining us and welcome to the webinar. This is the Miro Consulting webinar on Microsoft Audits, Triggers, Types, and How to Defend Yourself. My name is Sean Donahue, and I'm the VP of Marketing and Lead Salesforce Analyst at Miro Consulting, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Presenting today will be Tim Hegedus, Director of Technical Services and Microsoft Practice Manager at Miro Consulting. If you have any questions during the broadcast, please use the question box on your webinar control panel, and we will answer them at the end of the session. We'll take the questions in the order that it's received. And just so you know that when you ask a question, it will only be visible to us, the presenters. And when we answer your question, we'll read the question, but we won't say your name or anything. So all the questions are anonymous. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly explain who Miro is. Miro Consulting is a leading global provider of software asset management and subscription management services for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, and Salesforce. We specialize in license management, audit advisory, negotiation tactics, support management, and cloud services. Our mission is to help our clients maximize their ROI on their software license and subscription investments, stay in compliance, and negotiate successful contracts and audit settlements. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to begin the presentation. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome once again to our audit seminar entitled Microsoft Audits and How to Defend Yourself. What we'll be talking about today is three basic things: the various audit types, and to which ones you must pay attention. Right. Secondly, we're going to be talking about the kinds of things that can set an audit in motion, or what we refer to as triggers. And finally, we'll discuss how you might respond to an audit. Now, all of this information is in the 2021 Definitive Microsoft Audit Guide that is available from Miro. What we're doing here is presenting it because we feel this is a very, very important topic. Earlier this month now, we were privy to a survey in which Microsoft was deemed, quote unquote, most helpful in dealing with the audited firm. While the question of how that determination was made is yet unanswered, Miro believes through experience that Microsoft, to a point, has virtually always been among the most helpful. The precise text reads, in the survey, Micro Focus and Oracle were among the least helpful during an audit, while Microsoft and SAP were among the most helpful, quote unquote. Now, that may change, but later in that same article, it was cited that, and I'm doing air quotes once again, software publishers are stepping up recruitment into their license management and audit teams for 2021. Now, that could very likely translate into additional audits beginning this year and extending into next year and even further. Once whatever training they're undergoing is complete and the process is put into effect, Microsoft, like the other vendors, will then logically step up the quantity of audits themselves. Now, you're probably asking the question, what form will these audits take? Or how might they differ? Well, that is to be decided. But rest assured that Miro will be on top of these issues. So we recommend you keep in touch with us through phone calls and via attendance at these webinars, as well as others, to remain aware of how your organization might be affected. And we believe that this webinar is being offered in a quite timely way for the immediate needs of our audience. Now, there are various types of audits ranging from a friendly audit to a full-fledged Microsoft LLC audit. It is worth noting that only the true-up audit and the Microsoft LLC audit are deemed mandatory by Microsoft. The others, well, not so much mandatory as generally good ideas, sometimes. It's also important to note that you can simply discard a notification. Chiefly, this is either A, when the invitation comes from an unsolicited or someone other than Microsoft, generally with a V in the name, right? From someone who is other than the reseller of record, or it might also arrive at a suspicious time, such as within a year of your last Microsoft audit. So your response to these communications will be informed by the definitions that follow. Now, a friendly audit can be conducted internally, assuming that ample knowledge is held by those performing it. However, if an audit has never been done, or if one is conducted rather sporadically, then perhaps an outside agency that has such expertise is prudent. I mean, why get good at something you're only going to do once or only do sporadically, as the saying goes, right? So, in particular, this type of audit, really called an assessment, identifies any shortfalls or significant overages, and those are relayed only to your organization. That's what makes this type of audit friendly. Then there is the less than recommended or not recommended self-audit. And this differs from the friendly audit requested by Microsoft, or what I should really explain is that the self-audit is requested by Microsoft, whereas the friendly audit is something that you take on yourself. But they're not one and the same thing. A self-audit means your results, raw and unedited, are to be shared with Microsoft. And this is where some of the fakery that we'll discuss later on, what we described a little earlier, really comes into play. Now, a SAM audit, typically done in conjunction with a Microsoft reseller or LAR, and which is now referred to as a licensed solution provider or LSP, but for the sake of continuity, we'll continue to refer to it as a LAR. In any event, this SAM audit is different yet again. And in this case, a third party, sometimes the LAR itself, will conduct the audit. Now, you might be asking yourself again, is this third party really independent? And the answer would be a resounding certainly not. Right? In fact, both the audit partners and the licensed resellers have an obligation to share the information they gather with Microsoft. And most often, this is done without your first perusal or permission. And This is why Miro has chosen not to become one of these partners. Yet we can and do avail ourselves to all the same resources and the same information that these organizations do. But why would you want to avoid these? Right? Well, several reasons, including lots of users who are system administrators, right, or super users, and thus can install nearly anything on their workstations, including unlicensed software. An upgrade or a software or hardware that's in progress, um, or conversely, there is hardware that is being decommissioned and that software is being retired or repurposed. Now, both of those last 2 points can result in what are called false positives. Another point is that you haven't conducted any sort of audit, so you don't really have a good handle on what is deployed. And you do harbor some concerns that such an audit will discover something. Right? But beware that the auditor will share that information with Microsoft, right, who will interpret that accepted report as the need for your organization to purchase some additional licenses, right? Or some other reason, or all of those reasons, or perhaps something else. Now, there are more types of audits, right? Such as a true-up audit, right? We take a neutral stance on this, but more and more, almost without fail, Microsoft has implemented audit proceedings on its enterprise agreement customers. Now, once thought as something of a hedge against being audited, the enterprise agreement can now be considered the cause of an audit. Chiefly, this occurs in that third year, right before the final true-up for the term and the renewal. And the reason that they audit at that point is because some organizations have quite slyly avoided payments of software assurance fees by truing up only on the third anniversary. Right? Now, I want you to be aware that Microsoft can detect the install date of the software, and you will use that information to increase the exposure to your organization. Yet Microsoft will make this engagement out to be one that is very beneficial and very favorable. And it very likely is to Microsoft, right? Not to you. And by all means, you can assume that this type of audit is not fake because in our experience, a scammer wouldn't be interested in ensuring that a proper true-up was performed in the first place. Then there is the dreaded Microsoft LLC or the official audit. These are conducted by an authorized auditing party. Think of Deloitte or KPMG, right? And the purchases compelled by the findings are priced at the highest level that Microsoft has. That is, no level open agreement, right? Regardless of your ability or your ability to buy those licenses at a cheaper price, possibly because you are at some level within your enterprise agreement, such as B, C, or even D, or even more. So it disregards all of that and instead charges you the highest price that Microsoft has in its quiver. There could also be some financial penalties involved. If the compliance issues amount to more than 5% of your total license inventory, for instance, your organization could be saddled with the cost of the audit itself. right? So something to keep in mind. But the reality is that you have no choice but to comply with either the True Up audit or the Microsoft LLC audit because you don't own the software. Microsoft does, and you only have the right to use it, right? If you want some proof of what I'm saying, refer to the section Use, Ownership Rights, and Restrictions of your Microsoft Business and Services Agreement, or MBSA. Now, here's where the rubber really meets the road. Though perhaps toning down just a bit, these fake audits can seem somewhat cumbersome, not only technically, as all audits are, but perhaps also from a financial perspective. And what I'll do is, before we go on and talk about how to spot a fake audit, I want to reintroduce Sean Donahue from Miro. Go ahead, Sean.
Thanks, Tim. So one of the things that we try to warn all of our customers, our prospects, anybody who will listen really about is something that's going on with Microsoft that we call the fake audit. And we had a number of our clients and prospects come to us asking about this, and we did our own research, and we basically found that there are rogue Microsoft resellers and partners who essentially spam out requests for information, and they won't send it to the person on the contract. They'll send it to every IT person at the company. They'll send it to marketing people at the company. They'll send it to anybody they think might answer it. And it's a request for information. And we're going to go into the details here in a second and show you exactly how you could spot a fake audit. And just to make sure you're aware that this is not a small problem, we blogged about this about 2 years ago. We gave all the indications on how you can spot a fake. And a very high-level executive at Microsoft's partner program sent us an email and requested that we take the blog post down. And, you know, we want to be good citizens. We're not Microsoft partners, but still, we don't want to give out incorrect information. So we wrote back to this Microsoft executive and said, you know, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We would be more than happy to correct any misinformation in this blog post. Just tell us if we got any of these details incorrect, and we'd be happy to correct it. And they never got back to us. They never answered us in any way. We even followed up with them and said, you know, a couple emails more saying, hey, really, we really want to know if there's something incorrect here. Just let us know. We'll fix it. And they just never got back to us, which makes us kind of think that this is all pretty accurate information. And we've had numerous prospects and clients since come to us and find out again that these audit requests are in fact fake. But that's not to say if you refuse this, these rogue partners might still try to turn you into Microsoft. So if you get a fake audit request, now's the time. Number one, ignore it. And number two, make sure you're actually in compliance and, you know, get yourself a friendly audit somehow so that if they do turn you into Microsoft, you are prepared. Why don't you show us how to spot a fake audit?
Thank you, Sean. So listed here are some of those points as to when you might suspect that an audit might fall into that category of fake audit. I went through some of these earlier, but I'll go through them again. The sender has a V Microsoft address, such as you see there. That V stands for vendor, and it is not a Microsoft authorized individual. Or that email comes from someone who is not your Microsoft reseller or is not a Microsoft licensed partner, which your reseller would be, right? They ask for some email address where they can send forms out, right? A Microsoft partner will have that information in place and in advance. And the auditor's company indicates that he or she works at Microsoft, right? But rather at another company, right? So it's a if you wanted to check on the status of your auditor, go into that LinkedIn site, right? And here's a bit more detail on spotting the fake audit. More information can be found, like I said, in Miro's definitive Microsoft Audit Guide, all new for 2021. But some of the things that you'll see from these emails are that the email address does not match the person to whom you would be addressing an email or speaking or anything. And the reason behind that is because multiple people use that particular email to spam these requests out almost without concern as to the recipient, right? The auditor might use questionable file names, or the company is located outside of where you know you are purchasing the products from, right? Or perhaps that the letter is only delivered via email and not by paper mail. Microsoft makes it a point to not only send you an email, but also to deliver to perhaps the CEO of the company or perhaps some C-level person at the company a paper document that details what the scope of the audit is, etc. And then finally, that audit email, right, speaks to you about the penalties for refusing, irrespective of the fact that you may not have refused yet, right? And the fact that those penalties might not come to fruition in the case of a situation where Microsoft is working with you. A chief example comes from the wrong version of Office being installed. I don't want to say all the time, but quite frequently we have been successful in getting Microsoft to back off of that finding and allow the company to install the correct version of that product, for which they had ample inventory. So those are all some reasons and some signals that you ought to look for to spot a fake audit. Now, when we talk about audit triggers, we ask the question, what are they? What are some of those triggers that would cause a Microsoft audit? Well, there are some, but it's important to note that while Microsoft was deemed to be among the most helpful of the providers, they have not kept really to a very strict regimen of audits. That is, Microsoft has been targeting companies both large and small, including cloud service providers, partners, and virtually any organization that makes use of their products, right? And that's quite a number of targets. So it may be good practice to have a sound software asset management program in place and to level set that program with an assessment. Now, one of the audit triggers is your purchasing history. It's possible in that 2020 has interrupted your plans. More than likely it has. Or at least has changed them drastically. And to the extent that this has also caused an interruption to your Microsoft purchasing, might just place your organization in the crosshairs for a Microsoft audit, right? At least it will have caught the attention of those at Microsoft, including your account team, and raised your chances of getting audited. There has been and continues to be key changes in Microsoft licensing, even if your organization has made no changes outside of periodic upgrades, say from Windows Server 2012 to Windows Server 2019, just in time for the end of extended support, which ends, I believe, in October of 2023. But there are changes in the licensing rules that would affect this, right? And this would be compounded by the fact that new hardware was also part of that event. Now, this is a rather simplistic example, right? And there's a host of other changes that are more complex involving license mobility and the licensing adjustments that may cause a non-compliance situation. As a result of the economic impact of 2020, or perhaps not, many companies are considering something in the way of M&A activity. It could be a business strategy, or it could be some other strategy from a business perspective, simply to remain solvent. But how this affects the parties could be complicated, and oftentimes an overlooked part of this is the licensing until an audit is imminent, right? Now, when I say that an audit is imminent, I mean that your account team and the others at Microsoft, as well as your other vendors, will have firsthand knowledge in the form of the announcement that the company's privy or party to this merger or acquisition make. So right off the bat, this could potentially make you a target, especially in some cases where you have certain licensing constraints or certain licensing metrics involved. Now, as I said, software licensing is regrettably towards the bottom of the list of things that require the attention during and just after a merger or an acquisition. But how the company responds can be critical to its compliance status. And we talk about transitions to the cloud. Sometimes cloud transitions are presented as the easiest way to achieve compliance, and this is still somewhat true, sort of. What I mean is that the cloud subscriptions, the offerings, the security, the availability, indeed the cloud itself, has matured and is beginning to become the norm, if it hasn't already. And perhaps more importantly is Microsoft's turning towards the cloud ever more. Since Satya Nadella replaced the computer on every desk mantra of Steve Ballmer with his own mobile-first, cloud-first mantra back in 2014, Microsoft has been on a very aggressive slant toward cloud subscriptions. Sometimes, and this may be lost in its journey downstream, but in nearly the 7 years that this has passed, the cloud today is not what it was, right? So your organization might want to get some information about Microsoft's offering, and Miro can provide that information to you. Now, your account team may attempt to sell a cloud subscription, possibly through an upsell. Think Microsoft 365 Plan E3 going to Plan E5. Okay. Sometimes they would appear to be claiming some level of non-compliance as a result of this offer. However, this is where an independent review would actually come in. Now, even larger companies are somewhat ruffled by the threat that an audit poses, right? Nor are they immune to them. So it's good practice to understand how audits work and how to address them. So in this section of our presentation, we will cover the most critical points in ensuring the successful outcome. The first and most important aspect of any audit is control. Control of the timeline. That is when the audit commences, being mindful of Microsoft's fiscal year end and the audit team's proclivity towards its own time frame, that is quarter ends. Control of communications, right? Who will the audit team be interacting with? Ideally, this information is passed throughout the organization from the CEO down. Control over expectations. And as soon as it is practicable, the financial management of your organization will want to be apprised, as would the IT management. And though it would be unlikely to reach this level at Microsoft, the legal team, all made aware of what you're doing. And control over the settlement. And this involves the protocols that are involved with funding any purchases, as well as establishing a baseline and or future protections, both from Microsoft as well as internally. When we talk about points of contact, we're talking about having a less than somewhat savvy person as the external contact, or at least someone who could play that role. And that is a way to deflect the audits team comments. And that is mostly because that person can claim ignorance of the subject matter and state a need to go back to the experts. This person might also need to be coached by those experts on how to respond. One thing that is of paramount importance is never to provide a solid time frame for the delivery of information, opting for vague statements such as towards the middle of next week, I think, or towards the middle of the month. This forces the auditor to choose a date for which he or she might be responsible, but which was not offered by yourself. Now, one thing that Microsoft has a tendency to do is attempt to go around that individual, especially if they feel they are being stonewalled, reaching right up to the C-suite. So it is important that the word gets around upwards, downwards, laterally, sideways, any which way but loose, and that the proper communications to Microsoft is to contact that individual who they are being assigned to. In other words, no other person is to speak for your organization with regard to the audit except the authorized individual or individuals. Now, there are two parts of this: the Microsoft License Statement, or MLS, and the things that are not on that report. The MLS only includes those entitlements purchased under an eligible license agreement, including the enterprise agreement or the old Select or Select Plus agreements and the open agreements. And when I say the old Select or Select Plus agreements, they were replaced by the MPSA, or what is referred to as the Microsoft Products and Services Agreement. But those licenses currently appear in a separate tab, and they do not calculate into the totals listed in the license summary tab. Miro, just as a commercial message, did a webinar on the MLS and how that MPSA tab is not calculated into the license summary tabs. So that affects your license entitlement. But back to the MLS, it only includes the entitlements from commercial accounts. So if you are a government agency or an educational institution or a charitable organization, the MLS is not going to do you any good. Now, that information can either be gotten from the Volume License Servicing Center, or the VLSC, or the Volume Licensing Business Center. But for proper analysis, the MLS, which is a series of tabs within an Excel spreadsheet-like format, that is the tool of choice. Then there is the other information, right? And this comes from the OEM history report, which can be obtained from the software reseller from where the software was purchased. It may also come from the Microsoft customer agreement, and this may include some cloud agreements, which is always good information to have. The intent here is to have as much accurate information pertaining to your inventory as possible, and then compare this information to the license entitlements against which your deployments will be assessed. And in fact, you should insist that this list of entitlements be made available to you from the audit team. And then finally, when all that information is assembled, it serves to limit surprises, right? But because Microsoft licensing is so tricky, it may be worthwhile for you to enlist the services of a professional like Miro who understands Microsoft licensing and via interaction with you and your team endeavors to understand your architecture in terms of your deployment. Right? Now that expert will incorporate test servers, software and hardware upgrades, DR, access of all sorts, M&A activity, and much, much more in order to determine your organization's effective license position, or ELP. And it's very important that your license position is not based on Microsoft technical white papers. Right? I kind of want to repeat that. It is very important that your license position is not based on the Microsoft's technical white papers. The terms on these resources, these documents, these white papers differ from the official licensing rules and could affect in how you are deploying these products. They are often released at different times, and they're often out of date compared with the licensing documents. So, in any event, armed with this information, you can approach that audit or any audit more comfortably. So, I will now take some questions and turn it back over to Sean.
Thanks, Tim. We've actually run over our time here by a few minutes, so what we're going to do is everyone who asked questions, we're going to get back to you individually after the event here and give you the answers to your questions. And if you want, you could also follow up with us if you haven't already. We'd be more than happy to speak with you. Again, we're not a Microsoft partner. We don't report anything to Microsoft. It's 100% confidential. So with that, I'm just going to say that thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you found the presentation informative. If you have further questions, please email us at sales@miroconsulting.com. Call us at 732-738-8511, extension 1208, or just visit us on the web at miroconsulting.com. That's all for today. Thanks for attending. Have a great day.